Do keep writing your ideas. Don't let me stop your train of thought on this wonderful topic. So welcome to my session on punishment and humiliation. For those of you that have potentially heard of me or seen some of the stuff that I've done, may know that I speak quite a bit on the topic of psychological safety. And this session came about as I've been speaking on psychological safety, and at various conferences I've been to, I've run an open space session, which is a bit like an unconference, some people may have called it that, on punishment and humiliation, which is a very interactive kind of conversation about this topic. And I've tried to kind of pull it together into a more cohesive session, and this is you guys are experiencing this for the first time, so we'll see how it goes. But I would love to hear your feedback afterwards about how the session went for you. So my name's John LeDrew, and I have been a consultant, software engineer, agile coach for about 20 years now, and I started this podcast called The Agile Path last year, where I was exploring psychological safety. And as a result, this topic that I thought seemed like a simple idea, I realized that it's not really simple at all and has so many nuances and little complexities to it, that it became a bit of a passion for me. So let's look at what psychological safety is to begin with. So psychological safety is defined as a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. When I first read that definition, I really didn't get these words at all. And it wasn't that I didn't understand what they meant. They're not particularly complicated words. It was more the fact that I was not researching or looking into organizations that were rife with sexual discrimination or racism or all of those things. Those organizations exist, there are plenty of them out there, but that's not actually where, thankfully, the majority of professional individuals. There are plenty of dysfunctional companies, but thankfully we have dealt with a lot of those problems. I'm saying that lightly because I don't want to start up an issue, but for the most part, those issues, those things are not highly prevalent in professional life. So I was like, okay, so I know there are horrifically, abusive organizations out there, but I want to look at the organizations that aren't horrifically abusive, but are still dysfunctional. Why is that the case? And then I got stuck with these two words. I don't want organizations full of punishment and humiliation. That isn't what I'm looking for. And then I realized that it seems like, for me, punishment and humiliation in this context is a felt thing. It's an internal thing. This is not about me observing punishment and humiliation taking place on a team. If I was there, fly on the wall watching it, I couldn't go, that person's being punished. Maybe you could, but a lot of the time not. It's about how it feels. So you've had a couple of minutes now. Could you possibly just pass all of those post-it notes towards the front, and then we'll stick them up and have a look at some of these. I just pass them here, and I will stick them all to this door. Let's have a look. Wow. I'm hoping they're all going to stick. Normally when I start sticking things up, maybe I could recruit people. I need another pair of hands to stick them all. Just stick them anywhere. We're not going to... Yeah. So I'll talk. So let's have a look. We've got performance loss, unsafe, lack of control, reduction of freedom, lack of support. Humiliation could be pointing out failures or certain kinds of body language. I guess some of these seem self-referential, so self-doubt, I guess, is potentially a symptom of being punished, maybe. I don't know. Does anyone want to? Feel free to chip in while I'm reading these out. So we've got a bunch of examples there. I imagine we'll refer to them a little more later, and I've got you all thinking about what this punishment and humiliation means in your context. One of the things that people often find, and I've run a couple of workshops where we explore these topics, is that people often only see things as the sort of, they'll look at them and they might kind of comedically almost, humorously think about the extreme situations. You know, they'll think, oh, punishment, that's like a manager sending their team into the store cupboard for half an hour to think about why they failed the last sprint, or something along those lines. And obviously that, well, hopefully doesn't happen in many organisations. If they've adopted Scrum and then they're doing that, they probably have some work to do. But it is that you often don't think about the subtleties of this. So let's go to another question. So there is going to be a roving mic around. So if you, and as I ask questions, it's quite interactive. Just like stick your hand up in the air, because I believe we're recording it, so we don't want to lose this conversation. So why do we punish people? Does anyone have an idea? Why punish? Why do we need to punish people? Is that down here?
Got to get fit doing this.
Because we think it's going to change their behaviour.
Okay. Right. Any other ones? So we think it's going to change their behaviour.
To deflect blame from yourself.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Why might an organisation? So I've often asked the question that we do things in organisations to fulfil certain goals. So, for example, we will have meetings in organisations, theoretically, to fulfil the goal of synchronisation a lot of the time, bring people together and synchronise, get everyone on the same page. And that's the goal of that particular activity. What is the kind of organisational goal of punishment as a thing that happens? Thinking maybe about disciplinary action as a form of punishment. Why might we do that? Yeah, sorry, go ahead with the... Oh, one at the back. There's one at the back and then this chap here. So yeah, you go ahead.
Because we already tried the carrot and it didn't work.
Yeah, maybe. Go ahead.
Basically to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, so we hope that by punishing someone for that thing they've done, that they'll learn from that stick or whatever. Yeah. All right. So so this basic idea, right? There's well, we had deflecting blame from oneself. And we've had behaviour change generally be referenced a couple of times. There's another one that I've seen a little bit about. So what about a situation where a manager is dealing with a situation where maybe they've been on the phone to a customer's screaming at them because feature X that should have been out yesterday evening isn't quite as good as it should be. And they've just had half an hour of screaming and swearing down the phone from this guy. So they come out, they're a little bit het up from that experience, and they go over to the developer, we'll call him Freddie, and they have a polite conversation with Freddie about the quality of their work. If that conversation wasn't polite, what do you think is happening in that? What might happen? Has anyone experienced that, for example? Yeah, could I have a microphone here? That's all right. Sorry, you're right. You're still at the back and I keep getting you to run up to the front. It's going to be quite... So go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of a transference, you know. I feel bad, so therefore if I make somebody else feel bad, then I feel a bit better about it.
Yeah. So maybe some sort of justice or retribution almost.
Yeah. I didn't do this, therefore I'm going to shout at the person that did.
And we see the need for punishment as retribution actually in societies as well. You know, we see this feeling of someone has done X, someone burgled my house. I think they just deserves is that they get 6 months in, you know, a jail cell where they'll share it with some fat guy who snores every night or does other things. And that somehow feels like, you know, just deserves in that circumstance. So what happens when we punish? Who's been punished before? So could anyone tell me what it feels like to be punished? Anyone what does it feel like when you're punished? Makes you, I'll say it again, it's fine. Makes you feel like a child, someone said. Yeah, that's pretty good. Go on.
Makes you feel powerless.
Powerless, yeah. Frustrating. Yeah, so not great. Not necessarily engaging. Who can tell me whether or not someone said their behaviour changed? Who can think back to a time they were punished and thought, I definitely changed my behaviour as a result of being punished for something? Perhaps after they were, we'll say beyond the age of 7, as a general goal. Here, go ahead, if you can.
I mean, just generally in a negative kind of way, it makes you go into your shell and not actually say what you want to.
So your behaviour changed, but not necessarily how perhaps the punisher intended, in your view.
Probably did want me to be quiet, actually.
Yeah. So go ahead.
But yeah, again, in a negative way, that if I thought I was right and I've been punished, then
Okay.
I'm going to go like 2, 3, 4 times next time.
So has anyone had positive behaviour change? Oh, here we go. I'd like one at least balanced story. Positive behaviour change.
I use it as
Yeah, it is on, I think.
I use it as a fuel to get away. I put bad experience at the back of my head. I use them. I use just the I learned the lessons from it, and I use the negative to fuel me to get away from
Okay.
that place.
So that potentially is something that is, so it's psychologically, you could describe that, the fact that you probably have what would be described psychologically as a positive affect, or you might probably be an optimist, and people with that particular trait are far more likely to see the best in a bad situation. Oh, it's great they punished me, because that was an issue. Because the thing is that a lot of the time, the criticisms that you might receive, the things you might be punished for, in themselves aren't necessarily unjustified. Okay, so in that situation, the behaviours that you're doing, when we talk about punishment being ineffective, it doesn't necessarily mean that the behaviour that you were exhibiting is always positive to the organisation, and this manager's just doing it because they just enjoy penalising and humiliating people. Generally, the behaviour isn't positive, and we'd like to make it positive or enhance that behaviour in some way, and we try to punish to kind of change that direction. So, here's a question. Who's been a manager? Who's a manager in this room? Anyone been a manager, is a manager? And who's had to go through the disciplinary process with an employee, potentially fire someone? So, out of interest, who has done something? This is a sensitive question, but who maybe has felt wronged by someone else in that position and they had to take them out? Take them out. It's not quite that way, but who's been wronged by someone? In fact, anyone, not even managers. Who's been wronged by someone in some situation? Burgled, mugged, I don't know, something else. Do you think it feels better after we punish that person if we're able to? If we're able to for those things. Does that feel good? No? Would people admit to it feeling good? Schadenfreude is a little fantastic German word. Enjoying me. Is it me?
I don't know. Have you got a phone in your pocket?
You know what? It could be that. I'm going to shove that down. Look, amateur mistake. Look at that. It's probably not even on silent. God. Basic. But yeah, God. Start throwing things now. I won't do that again if you all punish me appropriately. So there's a certain, sometimes this desire to get retribution, and interestingly, not only I know religion has certain views on forgiveness, but interestingly on the psychology side, there's a lot of evidence to demonstrate that actually, hanging on to that anger for whatever that thing has happened doesn't do anyone any good, particularly. So, let's ask another question. We spoke a bit about innovation before, so I'd like to find out, we all work in knowledge work, I guess, I imagine, some sort of software or engineering or some sort of role like that. How often, when we are doing something, either as an engineer or a manager, it doesn't really matter what kind of cog we are within this innovation machine, how often are we 100% certain that the thing we're about to do is the right thing to do? Anyone have complete certainty? Would anyone admit to being completely certain? Because we love convincing ourselves that we're certain of the direction that we move in. So another thing, how often does anyone here have 100% control over their actions all the time? Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. I would like it when someone claims that they do. And how often do you think we are affected by, if we're not completely in control, then who is? Would be another question for you. So if we're not the ones in 100% control, either of our actions or, you know, potentially of the things we're planning on doing or anything else, who is in control of us if we don't have 100% control? What are the things that affect us day to day? Anyone have any ideas? Go ahead. What? Sorry, what was that? The chimp paradox. Sorry, yes. So, trying to remember I read that a few years ago. Do you want to really quickly summarise that for everyone?
Chimp is your emotional side of your brain.
Yeah.
Which reacts first.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So, okay. So Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've read that, which is like the extended 9-hour Everest equivalent book of that, we talk about the fast brain and fast thinking and slow thinking. So the emotional side are kind of, some people have defined it as right brain, left brain. So your right brain, fast brain. Yeah, so that's true. I would still say that we still have a certain amount of control over that. I don't think it's all necessarily, that's still within me, okay? That's still my body, you know, systems exerting control over itself, even if it's instinctive reactions. It's still, maybe not control, but it's certainly me acting as an agent, myself, as opposed to something else. What else could trigger those things? What could trigger my 8 brain, do you think? What other things? Sorry, did someone say? Anger? What, anger at someone else? Yeah? Or with ourselves. Yeah, so there are a lot of things that affect how we react in any particular situation that definitely are not things that we can directly influence. So what I want to do now is look at a couple of situations, a couple of example projects. So here is a project, and now this is a really simple project, okay? So as you can see, we only have one decision to make in this project, and if we end up here, our project fails 100% failure. If we end up over here, we have 100% success, okay? And it's really easy. There's just one decision to make. We've just got to decide A, B, or C, and we kind of know that this already. So the leadership are already very much aware in our organisation of this way, because it's so simple. They already know this. And what's more, it's completely predictable. So we know that that's the right way to go, but we employ people that aren't necessarily, highly intelligent problem solvers, because they bugger off too quickly. We don't want them to stay. So in this organisation, we just like to punish people. Oh, you've gone the wrong way. So they arrive the first day and they go down corridor A, and we're like, nah, I don't know, give them an electric shock or something, maybe something that lets them know. They go down corridor B, and get them again, and now they come back the next day because it's all completely predictable and exactly the same every day. And now they just keep going, so it works really well. So punishment is great in this context. Who works on projects as simple as that? Who has ever in the history of software worked on a project as simple as that? Okay, so that's good. I thought it was risky. Maybe I'll get a few hands there, but so obviously it doesn't look like that in real life, and no one's worked on a project. It's sort of more like this. And what's great is that even though there might be some path, there we go, we get 97% success if we go up that route. Even though we might find that path, the next day it's changed again. Oh crap, now we don't know where the success is. So what's interesting here is that there's an obvious route here, so we could just do that. And I think that's roughly, a relatively sane route to the 97%. But the funny thing is that it doesn't ever look like that, does it? The world, the problem that we're solving is like this. In fact, this is probably only capturing 1% of the complexity of the typical software project that we will deal with, and that project is just, installing WordPress somewhere. So it doesn't look like that. It actually looks, more like that. our path to success. So we go up here and, oh, we hit a dead end, so we had to come back again, and then another one, and then, oh, and we kept going round until eventually, luckily for us, we actually did make it to 97%. And we got a lot of value from that. We could just have easily have ended up over here with a bit less value, and then we might need to decide if that's where we want to go. Maybe we might want to try and rethink and get better value. So what normally happens in organizations, what's interesting about the last example is that in that simple domain, and for those of you familiar with Cynefin or heard of simple or obvious domains versus complex, in that simple domain where everything is predictable, which means everyone in that system, everyone in that problem knows kind of in advance really what's going to happen as a result of their actions. I know as an employee that has been electrocuted 1 or 2 times going down the wrong path that I won't get zapped if I walk down corridor C. And that's safe for me. And that's completely predictable, in which case the behavior that we want from that act of punishment from those individuals is also predictable. They will be able to, they'll go in and we will see that pretty quickly. You know, it's a simple problem. So pretty quickly they are going to, you know, go the right path. That's great if it was the real world. The problem is actually, just like many management practices, we take and assume frequently that we are operating in the simple or obvious domains, when actually 99% of software exists in the complex domain. This is what most software projects look like. So what happens is that because we believe we're operating in the simple domain, we also believe that we can apply those ideas around behavior change and punishment in the same way. So we go up here and we hit a dead end. Our team comes back and says, PMO, we didn't make any progress this week. You know, in fact, we're going to have to really rethink our direction. And PMO says, don't fuck up again, and prods them with a cattle prod for a few minutes each, which is what happens in most companies, I think, something like that. And then they rethink, and they come back up here, and they've done it again. And there's the PMO with his cattle prod again. I like the fact that the PMO in this room is probably the least likely individual I could imagine jabbing a bunch of people with a cattle prod. But there we go. And then they kind of come back here and they eventually managed to get round, but before that they took a wrong turning here, not quite as much of a refactor, but still a bit, and more electric shocks going round. Luckily for them, they managed to pick the right choices going forward, and they get to the end. But just as we heard in the previous talk, the problem is that when we penalise these failures, because of the fact that the psychology of punishment is that punishment worked in the previous example. When I say worked, I don't mean it was humane or a good idea. I mean the intended outcome of behaviour change was there because of the domain that that was applied in. And that's specifically because of the fact that I am able to predict the future outcome with some accuracy because of how simple the domain is, which means that me as an actor, so as a developer or something in this situation, I know that I make a decision and I can very reliably, in fact 100% accuracy because of this wonderful world that we're in, I know that route C is safe and the others are dangerous or risky, so I won't go that way. The problem is here is that, like we said in the previous slide, every day this layout changes. In fact, the thing is that this entire map wasn't visible at day one. We didn't know what it looked like. All they could see here was that they had a whole bunch of options. All they could see here was that they couldn't see any more and they had to come back. All they could see here was that they had a bunch of options. They didn't know how far away they were from their goal or really how many or all of the choices. In fact, there's only 2 choices here, but in reality, there's could be thousands at every possible step. And you don't have that certainty. So what happens if you can imagine a situation where, for all intents and purposes, the outcome of my decision, whether or not I might get punished or not, whether or not I might experience some dissatisfaction, some pain, some penalization, some performance improvement plan in my organization, is actually dependent on something that I can't predict. at all. So what happens? So let's, so as we're saying, punishment only works when the recipient can preempt the undesirable action. So when they can preempt the outcome of what it is they're about to do. In that circumstance, it works. The problem is that in knowledge work, we're never able to do that, ever. Unless we're talking, I don't know, murder, maybe, in theory. But then interestingly, if you look at murder as a crime outside of the system, and you might think that premeditated murder, perhaps, in states in America where they have the death penalty, for example. Pretty heavy penalty, isn't it? Even frankly, life imprisonment is a pretty heavy penalty. That should be a deterrent, shouldn't it? In theory, for any premeditated action should work with punishment, right? They actually don't. They don't. So, here's the thing. Who has deliberately made a mistake? Who thought when they went in? Is any developers in here? Are there one or two? So who wrote a bug today deliberately? No one wrote a bug? No one? Did anyone write a bug today, do you think? Would anyone say? Yeah, good. There we go. Someone wrote a bug. Congratulations. Awesome work. So there are very, very few people that will exist on your project whose sole purpose it is to just screw with your project. Okay? Very few. These people don't really exist. In fact, you'd be quite lucky to find one of them. There's a guy called Deming, W. Edwards Deming, who is largely attributed to kind of assisting in the recovery of the Japanese manufacturing industry after the Second World War. Entertainingly, after the US car industry said that they weren't really interested in his contributions, and the US car industry obviously did really, really well after that point. Anyone who's been to Detroit recently will just see how thriving it is as a result of them asking Deming to go away. Deming says that a bad system will beat a good person every time. And he also comments that when you look at mistakes in a system, mistakes made by an individual, that 95% of the time that problem is systemic and only 5% is related to the system. And he uses that as an argument from the perspective of problem solving. We talk a lot about problem solving this evening. So problem solving, when we're trying to solve the problem, let's say we found a defect in the code. Oh, defect. Good God, oh no, or the builder's broken. Ah, emergency. And then I've seen in many organizations when they're using continuous integration and things, they like to just tap on a bit of humiliation to discourage broken builds. So it will be like, oh, Mike did it. Mike, it's you. You're going to have to wear the broken cap of shame for the rest of the day and parade around the canteen naked, for 5 hours and whatever else, other humiliating activities they might get them to do. And what's interesting is one of my favorite, the interesting is Mike is just as likely to screw up and break the build the following day. Because this stuff happens. There's anyone that has worked on a CI system or anything else, the build just will break. It's going to happen. People will screw up. They will commit things. Their tests won't be as thorough as they thought they were. All of that stuff is going to happen, regardless of how thorough you are and how many layers of TDD and other testing and other things you have. Your build's still going to break every now and again. So it's just as likely to break in the same way, almost, the following day. So what's the solution? If Mike keeps breaking the build, should we fire Mike? He's obviously incompetent. Is that a good idea? Performance? Pardon? If he keeps breaking the same line of code in the same way, in the same file, maybe that's not a great sign. I've never met anyone that's done that in reality. Although interestingly, that would suggest, wouldn't it, that the testing hadn't actually been, well, either he was doing it on purpose, he'd be that rare occasion, so everyone should go out and buy a lottery ticket because they found one of these people. It must mean you're on there's a weird like luck bubble in your office. Or the other side is actually that it's indicating that the system itself that should be capturing those errors, you shouldn't actually be able to commit the same build break, especially if it didn't trigger any broken tests or other types of things. The second time around, you should fix the system. Who's familiar? There's a famous story from Etsy. A new engineer joined Etsy, and I think within their first or second week, they made a small CSS change, and it actually took down the login page on Etsy for a weekend. The engineer obviously thought they were going to be fired for this, as they had cost however many £1 million, probably of Etsy. And they were given instead a 3-arm sweater that was knitted for them and told and thanked for helping them find a lack of resilience in their continuous deployment system. Another story was I think it was an IBM consultant. I can't remember the situation they were dealing with, but this consultant made some mistakes on a project that cost IBM $10 million that they had to refund to a client they were working for. The following day, this guy comes into the office and goes into the manager's office and says, "Look, I'm happy to be scapegoated here. It was my fault. I hold my hands up. Feel free to dismiss me if it makes it politically easier for the company." And he said, "Why on earth would I fire you? I've just spent $10 million on training you." So what Deming's saying here, when it comes to problem solving, we have a defect in our system, the build is broken, etc., is that if you focus on the individual, you're only 5% likely to actually be solving the problem. If you've got that one guy that's committing broken code into the system and we fire Mike because he's obviously crappy, then actually there's a 95% chance that another developer in the team will make exactly the same mistake and break the build in the same way. If you convince yourself that you fix the problem through firing Mike. So one of the things that people say when I say you're very unlikely to find these people that are trying to screw a company is that I know that everyone is thinking, I've got one on my team. And I've described these people as, could anyone relate to this phrase, the energy black hole on the team? So these are, one or two, individuals that just as soon as they are present in the room, the energy is just sucked into them. So who's working with one of those people now, out of interest? So out of interest, does anyone know, you might not know, but as far as you're aware, were those people, and have they been on the team for longer than anyone else? They've been in the company for quite a long time, a lot of them. Really? So there's some head shaking. Could I get a microphone over to this chap who shook his head when I said that? So they've not been in the team. So they arrived, and their first day they were just in the meeting room and just like, oh shit.
Pretty much, yeah. Very angry.
So that is, and they got through your hiring process.
Yeah.
Wow, that's you need to do more drug tests in your interviews, I think. Generally, with one or two exceptions, people don't get hired when they show a complete lack of engagement in the hiring process, or when they start, or they don't really make it through their trial period most of the time, because we don't really like working with these people. A lot of the time, these individuals have been in the company for longer than anyone else, and they're still there. And you've got to wonder, well, if they were happy and engaged on day one, why aren't they anymore? Is their disengagement a canary for the state of the organization and the situation? So one of the big things that I will talk about on my other session on psychological safety is to address these situations with curiosity. You can look at that negative behavior, that negative thing that this person is doing, be that behavioral or kind of competence related, be that code or anything else. But you always have to dig a little deeper and say, well, what's going on here? I know that Bob is a pain in the arse in every single meeting, but why is that? And was he always like that? Was there something that changed? Is there something I can learn from him about the situation? Perhaps he's someone that has raised the red flag quite a few times in the past, and it's not been listened to. Maybe that's often the case. So, a story. Imagine you're a PMO, product owner, project manager, something along those lines, and it's 12 o'clock, and your boss, or rather, sorry, you've just got off the phone with a client, and they've said, "Oh, you know, we've got this feature that we want out. Do you think your team will be able to get it out by the end of the day so we could test it?" And you say, "Oh, I don't know, but I'll go on speak to the dev, and we'll see what happens." You wander over to Bob's desk and say, "Hey, Bob, how's it going? Do you think we'll be able to get this done by the end of the day?" And this isn't a negative conversation. This is a friendly conversation. You know, we can talk a lot about negative project manager relationships, but just assume this is just a friendly conversation. "Yeah, sure, I think I can manage to get that done. That's okay." And you say, "Look, I'm going to be in meetings for the rest of the day, but I'll come and see you at 5 o'clock when I get out, and we'll see where you're up to, you know, so I can update the client." And you go and let the client know it's all good, we can do it. And you go into your meetings. And at 5 p.m. you come out. Where's Bob? Bob's gone. No one knows where Bob is. Doesn't look like this work's finished. So, next morning, 9 a.m., Bob walks in. "Morning." What happens? How do we deal with that? Who screwed up? Anyone want to venture a possible response to that? How are you feeling as a PO or PM or product owner, something in that situation? PMO, what's going on? What is that, angry? Yeah?
Disappointed, let down.
So angry, disappointed. What was the main problem? What would you say Bob's main fault was here? How did he screw up? Pardon? Not letting you know, yeah. Can anyone think of a justified reason why Bob might have left the office? We don't know anything about him. I haven't told you anything about him. So
Family emergency?
Family emergency, yeah? So how often... Joe, go ahead. There's someone else there at the back. There we go.
I kind of think the PM screwed up a bit because he asked Bob to drop everything and work on a problem, and then he went in meetings and didn't compromise himself to...
He might not, yeah, so there could easily be a PM screw up. It's not surprising that the developer at the back there would
PMs
finger
don't
at
screw
the PM. That's not, but that's also true. There's, you know, I'm asking you to point blame at having discredited the value of blame for the last 30 minutes. So go ahead, sorry.
I also wonder if there's stuff about the PM not giving Bob enough context to understand why he needed it by then, and that he needed to be reported back to.
Yeah, and also Bob didn't ask for that either.
It's a problem with the process, I think, rather than the people.
See, that's the obvious answer in this context, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, the client needs to ask for it.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, I've deliberately not given you very much information here because I want you to be in the position of the project manager who might be in a position to dole out some punishment, okay, at this point. We need to show Bob that what he did wasn't right, okay? And when I've done this in a workshop and I've asked given this same anecdote, many people will say that they think Bob does deserve some punishment. He needs to be shown how to behave. And interestingly, we often will focus on, they'll go, "Oh, but you know, I get it. He might not have finished it because it was too complicated. You know, it wasn't as complex." And they will go, "Yeah, but that software's complicated. You know, it's fine. It doesn't matter that he didn't deliver it. I could have handled that, but he didn't tell me. He didn't communicate to me. Okay, that he didn't do anything. Okay." And the funny thing is let's assume someone said family emergency. Let's assume he got up, walked out of the office because his kid was in hospital. Okay, frankly, it was that urgent. He didn't even think about emailing. And most people, including the PMO in this context, would probably say, "Sure, I'd probably do the same thing. I'm not going to rush out. I'm not going to, think about work. My kid in hospital is more important than work." Hopefully, most PMs would think that. And one of the interesting things is I've had a couple of times where someone will say, no, I think he does need to be shown that communication is important. We need to punish him to demonstrate that. And I'll look over at this wall, which we have a nice little menu of punishments available. I'll say, well, pick one. What does he deserve? Shall we threaten him? Shall we, let's have a look, what can we do? Let's have a look, I'm trying to, what's it? Yeah, so being managed by non-technical people who don't understand how software should be developed. We could move them into a world that could be like, we could box them into there. We could just fire him, you know. There's a bunch of things. We could just pick one of these. And a lot of the time, these individuals will go, I can't pick one. Or they'll go, oh, they're all really extreme. I'll say, all right, fine. If they're extreme, pick one and then tone it down. And the people that I speak to are like, they really want to punish. But they have no idea how to do it. Because actually, when you make punishment a tangible thing, it feels completely unreasonable. And there's a reason for that. Because actually, in a professional context, almost all forms of punishment are completely unreasonable. And they're not from a place of genuine, conscious, I would like to do this to change this person's behavior. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking, this guy humiliated me. I spent half an hour on the phone to a customer being sworn at. I'm pissed off. I'm pissed off with Bob for doing that. Because I couldn't tell him anything because Bob didn't communicate to me. And you know what? Bob's probably wrong. He did screw up. That's fair enough. Because he did. You should communicate when you know, that's a basic fact of you know, a good professional-like context, regardless of all of the technical process problems that Bob might be indicating here. He wasn't pairing, all of these problems. There's a million potential problems with how his technical process was. But either way, as a professional, he should have communicated. The fact is mistakes happen because things are complicated, because we live in a complex domain. And when we look at that big map before of a model of a complex problem, actually all that's modeling is just the decisions and the things you have to make on the software project you're working on. It's not modeling all of the things that are happening and all the complexity that's happening in each of the individuals' lives that are also working on it. Because, you know, amazingly, one of the unfortunate limitations of the current professional world is you employ human beings who are highly imperfect, generally pretty disorganized, messy, and a pain in the arse to manage. And that's just a fact. They're just messy. Humans are messy. That doesn't make them any bad at what they do, but they just are. Humans are a pain. And that makes it really risky to work with human beings, because things like that happen. Stuff happens in life. And that life is almost always going to be more important than whatever is happening in the office. So that's a really critical thing to remember, that when we're dealing with these situations, whether it's Bob not working or whether it's the energy black hole you might have in your organization, is to always think about, well, what's really causing this? Because people don't want to screw up. People want to do a good job because it feels good to do a good job. It feels good to know that every day I come into the office, I can do the best that I feel I'm capable of. And when people don't feel like they can do the best that they are capable of, that every day eats into their engagement and their motivation, and then they end up as energy black holes. So, yeah, punishment and its sweetheart, humiliation, are pretty common across organizations. Whether or not that's official organizational policy, you know, performance improvement plans, disciplinary procedures, those sorts of things, which are generally punishment in other ways. Or whether that's informal punishment, whether that's just kind of commonly accepted behaviors within the team. They are pretty common. But when we apply them to penalize mistakes in complex work, which is, as we said, where we are. We don't do simple work in software. We just don't. There are too many moving parts in everything we do. Unless we're talking about penalizing people for, you know, for pulling on the door that's marked push, then we're really not, you know, that would work actually, if we just electrocuted people that pushed instead of pulled on the door. They'd learn really quickly, regardless of how bad the UX on the door was. But actually, it does nothing but inhibit the problem-solving process. It just it fills people with fear. That's what happens. If you punish people for a context where they don't have any control over because there are too many moving parts, it could even be teams, like we said, human systems. What if you've committed as a team to deliver something at the end of the week, and then Bob's off for 2 days because his kid's sick? That stuff happens. The team fails. Does the team get punished? They do in some companies. No, you should have just dealt with it. You have to be able to deal with these resource problems. Resource problems, human problems. So I posit that punishment is just a waste. It's a wasteful activity in the complex domain that we're all in, and frankly makes our places and our places to work less and less humane by the second. So thank you very much.